Hello and welcome to everybody here who is tuning in either live or in the recording for Reloveution's monthly Power Hour. Today we are going to be talking about the power question, what can I do to support wellness and mental health on my team? It is Mental Health Awareness Month in the United States, and we are thinking really critically about the things that workplaces do really well and the things that workplaces do quite poorly, and the things that leaders do quite well and the things that leaders do quite poorly in relation to supporting the well-being of staff, of employees, of colleagues, of partners, of stakeholders, of board members, of all of the people and complex human beings that we interact with on a regular basis. So I encourage you today to tune in the way that feels most comfortable. So if you are in with us live today, you can keep your camera on or off and choose to participate actively or passively. You will get a recording following the session, but if you want this deck in particular, please reach out to me directly and I will get that to you. And for those of you who are tuning in live, you can ask questions in real time. You can feel free to interrupt me or share from your own experiences. I'm not going to be offended by that. And again, if you just want to sit there and listen, that is also fine. We are going to start our time today with a grounding exercise, and then we will move into 10 tips and tricks, and it's a lot more than that, but we are going to give you at least 10 tips and tricks for being able to support your team, their health, their mental health, and their wellness. And then we will have a period of questions and answers, which if people live have questions, we will answer them. If not, we will close off. I also want to share that if you are not tuning in live and you have questions or responses and you would like to find time with me to discuss anything that we go over today, I will share the way to reach me at the end of the presentation. And again, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Marissa Badgley. I am the founder of Reloveution. We are a consulting and professional development services provider focused on building more compassionate and human-centered and community-centered worlds of work. And so mental health is a huge piece of this. We do a lot of work with teams and leaders and organizations to help not only support individual wellness, but organizational wellness. And that is what we are going to be talking about today. We are going to start here with setting ourselves up for success for this power hour. We want you to be able to show up powerfully and for yourselves. And so we're going to take a grounding pause here. And I invite you to take a deep breath. I invite you to settle into your space wherever you are, to focus on the flowers that are on the screen, if that's useful for you, or to close your eyes. And again, just start breathing for yourself and recognize that in the next 3 minutes, you're not going to totally stop your mind. You are not going to be able to fully stop your thinking. You are not going to be able to solve all of life or work's problems right now. And there's no right or wrong way to engage in these grounding moments, and yet they are so incredibly important and useful to our ability to lead, to our ability to work, to our ability to be productive, and to feel good about ourselves in the process. So again, let's settle in and just take like 5 deep breaths, deep inhales and out exhales. And as you settle into the natural rhythm of your breathing, recognize that you're going to hear sounds. There's construction happening in my house right now. That you are going to potentially have distractions. Your phone might buzz. And just for the next 2 minutes, try to be here. Notice what's happening around you, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're smelling, maybe what you're feeling. And again, take those deep breaths in and out. And observe what's happening in your breathing. And notice where your mind is going. Just bring it back to the space if it's going someplace else. And just take about 30 seconds to really focus on that breath. And again, if thoughts are creeping into your mind, notice them and let them drift away. If you're finding it difficult to ground right now, know that that's okay too. Just giving yourself a moment of pause makes a really big difference. Let go of any expectations or judgments you may be feeling about this time, about this space, about yourself. And breathe in and breathe out. Know that wherever you are, however you're feeling today or in this moment, you are not alone. And just take another 5 deep breaths again to re-enter into a learning space. And give yourself gratitude for giving yourself that moment of pause, for giving yourself permission to be here in this space today, however you are showing up. Thanks to those of you who just tuned in. Just want to remind folks that you can tune in to the level of comfort and awareness and as actively or passively as you choose today. And this session is being recorded. So for those of us who are tuning in live today, I just want to get a pulse of the room so that I can adjust a little bit on the fly if needed. And so I invite you to write in the chat, what are some of the reasons that you are here today? What are you hoping to learn? What are you wondering about? And how do you feel like we or I can help? And so you're going to put that in the chat. And while you're coming up with those things, I'm just going to tell you a little bit of my story. And if you're on my newsletter, you will have gotten some of this in my newsletter or in the Reloveution newsletter last week. So mental health and wellness at work are really important to me because they're deeply personal to me. I have been in many toxic and hazardous workplaces that not only weren't good for my health, but were toxic and hazardous and violent to my health. So that could look like ineffective leadership. It looks like discriminatory or biased systems and policies. It is about having productivity elevated above humanity and profit or funding elevated again above real human lives. It might look like compromising on values or feeling like you don't belong. And I've experienced all of those things to the point where in my last and most recent workplace, where before I went out on my own, I was experiencing panic attacks and frustration and burnout at a level that ended me up in the hospital twice with or chest pain so bad that I was convinced I was having a heart attack, and an infuriating diagnosis of just being stressed out. And recognizing on my journey that stress and that burnout there were pieces of that were within my control, but a lot of it was outside of my control. And so Reloveution was founded on the foundation of how do we help prevent what happened to me in workplaces from happening to other people, which means that we need to be actively cultivating wellness and not just pushing people, treating people as cogs in the machine, no matter how much good work they're doing. I was doing good work. I loved my job, and I still ended up in a place where my mental health was depreciated so much that I had to quit without anything lined up. And that's my story. And I would be happy to speak more about that story and how I ended up here and founding Reloveution with anyone who's interested. But today I want to share with you some of the things that we've learned to be able to support mental health and well-being in workplaces. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody, whether you're tuning in live or not tuning in live. Thank you for being here and for caring about this topic. That's the first step, right? When we're thinking about mental health awareness, showing up in a space like this means that you are aware of what is going on in workplaces and potentially on your team. And the next step is mental health action. So how do we actually do something about it? So thank you for taking the step. Thank you for being here. And I just want to name that there are some things popping up in the chat here, some privately and some publicly. So I'm just going to read some of these out loud. So as a manager at a startup, there's a lot of uncertainty in our work. This only compounds the chaos of the world around us that impacts our day-to-day lives. I want to know how to support my team through any uncertainty and chaos that they may be facing. Also seeing what are some of the unspoken clues that a team member may be struggling. How can I acknowledge and offer support? Also seeing I myself am feeling really burned out, and I know that my team is feeling the same way. Sometimes I'm at a loss of what to do or how to help them while still being productive. These are all things that we are going to touch on today, and even more. So you're going to walk away with 10 topic areas for being able to address wellness and mental health on your team, and a lot of sub strategies, tips, and tricks from along the way. So what I want to share here before we get into those tips and tricks is that workplace wellness is not merely the absence of illness and mental health challenges. So just because we're not seeing people who are depressed or anxious or burnt out, or we're not feeling those things, or it's not having an impact, just because those things are absent doesn't mean that our workplace is well or that our team is well. We actually need to be actively cultivating well-being, emotional honesty, and heart. And so heart is our framework here at Reloveution. It stands for humanity, empathy, authenticity, relationships, and trust. And our theory is that if leadership and organizations are grounded in heart, we have the ability to create real change for human beings and real change for the world. So this isn't, what we're presenting today isn't just about how do we get rid of mental illness or support people who are going through mental illness. It's about how do we actively create the presence of well-being. And that's where the power of this happens. So let's get into it. There are 10 red circles here. We're going to go over all of them to some extent. The core of this is that in order to support our teammates, in order to even recognize that our teammates are struggling, we need to commit to radical compassion and care. So radical compassion and radical care. And so what does this mean? It means we need to move beyond symbolic action and towards systemic and sustainable solutions. So I think a lot of people can resonate with the experience of every month or once a quarter, we have a massage therapist come in. And that's great. I love massages, but often that's a symbolic action that is only temporarily solving wellness challenges. The other thing that I want us to pay attention to today is that self-care isn't the solution. It's a solution, but it's not the solution. One of my pet peeves in the wellness world is that so much of it is centered around self-care. And we put the onus on people who are suffering to take care of themselves, to be able to heal themselves, when in fact, it's the systems that are broken. So in order to actually cultivate wellness, we need to think about how do we create systems, policies, procedures, leadership, culture, all of those things that actually support human beings and not just ask human beings to take care of themselves. Another thing that I want us to pay attention to today is that employee wellness is something that we want all, or at least most of the time, not just when leaders want it or when it's convenient. So maybe you have an annual retreat or you have a gratitude practice that happens once a week in your workplace. All of that is great. Don't stop doing it. And employee wellness is something we need to be paying attention to all of the time, not just at scheduled moments. You might be showing up here in a space where you know that your team is struggling, but you don't feel like you're struggling in the same way, or you don't agree with the suffering on your team. I hear from a lot of people about generational challenges where they say these millennials and Gen Zers, they're just so lazy, they don't want to work. Or from millennials and Gen Zers who say these Gen Xers and baby boomers, they just don't get it. Even if you aren't impacted or you don't agree with the mindset, if that mindset exists, it's something we need to be paying attention to. And the last couple of things here are that accountability and high expectations are a part of radical compassion and care. So being a compassionate leader, supporting your team, caring about your team does not exempt your teammates from being held accountable and from doing their jobs. That is never what I'm trying to say. So that's really, really important to me. And none of this is going to be cookie cutter for individuals or for your workplaces. So you're going to hear things today that are going to work. You're going to hear things today that are not going to work in your workplace, either for you or for your organization. And that's okay. You can pick and choose what it is that you want to focus on and let me know how I can support in the meantime. All right. So what does this concept of radical compassion and radical care mean? It means that we need to acknowledge and embrace the resilience, brilliance, and humanity of all people, even our performers that are getting a solid C, our underperformers, the people who drive us crazy. Everybody needs to be acknowledged and embraced for their humanity. And that is one of the most important pieces of showing up with radical compassion and care. It also means that we need to listen and learn about human beings for who they are and not just for what they do. It means we need to recognize the impact of loss and trauma on health, well-being, and behavior. The last chapter, the last couple of years in our society have been one of persistent loss and persistent collective trauma and individual trauma. And we need to name that. And we need to name the fact that that is going to impact workers no matter whether we want it to or not. And probably no matter how well you do at this or not. We also need to prepare and equip leaders, all of you potentially, maybe your bosses, maybe your staff, with the tools and knowledge to support psychological, social, and emotional needs. This doesn't mean that you're going to be a therapist. It doesn't mean you have to cross boundaries, but we want you to be able to see this is how a person is struggling. This is how a person is suffering. These are the things that I can do in my practice and within the purview of my role to truly support that human being that's showing up in front of me, even if that just means referring out to other resources. Radical compassion and care means we need to abolish apathy and carelessness. So if you yourself aren't caring about your job, about your work, about your organization, about the people you're working with, it's really hard to show up in this way. It requires us to care. And it means that we have to root workplace ethos in hope, trust, and love, rather than scarcity or fear or competition. And this is a mindset shift in a lot of places. But if we are rooting in productivity, in profit, in fear, in competition, in apathy, we are going to yield very different results than if we are going to actually ground our practice in hope and trust and love. The last piece of this is that radical compassion and care means that we need to fix the sidewalk. And this is really, really important and something that we talk about a lot. And this is what I mean by that. So we talk a lot about empathetic leadership in our culture. We talk a lot about compassionate leadership in our culture. And I think we don't go far enough in that work. So you'll see over here on the far left, we already talked about we need to abolish apathy. And then there's a spectrum here of how to show up. And we can show up with pity. We can show up with sympathy. We can show up with empathy, which is great. That is the bare minimum. We can also show up with compassion, and then we can show up with this radical compassion and care. And this is where fixing the sidewalk comes in. So pity looks like you're walking down the sidewalk and somebody falls down in front of you. Pity is, I acknowledge your suffering. He fell down or you fell. Literally the least we can do. Sympathy is, I care about your suffering. I'm just like, ouch, that's gotta hurt. Empathy, again, which is the bare minimum, is that I actually feel your suffering to some extent. It might look like it hurt a lot when I fell last week. Compassion means that we are motivated to relieve the suffering of others. Here, let me help you up. And radical compassion and care is about actually taking actions to relieve suffering and building systems to prevent suffering from occurring to begin with. So you should go to the doctor and I'll make sure you're paid for today. Or look, I fixed the sidewalk so you won't fall again. In each of your roles, you have different amount of control or power to fix the sidewalk. And showing up with this radical compassion and care means actually fixing the sidewalks wherever we can. So I just want you to think about for a second what that means for you in your practice. What does it mean to show up with radical compassion and care? How do you go about fixing that sidewalk or taking actions to relieve the suffering of the people who are suffering in your workplace? And sometimes suffering feels like a big word, but I know for me, it was not too big of a word. There are lots of ways that people suffer in workplaces. And you can see here that along this spectrum, the farther along we get to the right of the spectrum, the more impact we are going to have as leaders and in building organizations that prioritize wellness. So each of the following things that I'm going to be reviewing are elements of that action, things that you can do to either fix the sidewalk or to take action to respond to suffering or lack of well-being or mental health challenges in your workplace. So there are 10 of them. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. The first is that regular, meaningful check-ins go a really, really long way. This means that we are asking questions about how people truly are on a regular basis. We're asking questions about how they truly are in relation to their tasks and their work product. We're asking questions about how people truly are around their emotions, around their mindsets. That truly are piece is really important because so often you say, hey, how are you? And the person says, I'm fine. Or they say, it's been a rough week. And then we move on to the rest of our agenda. Part of this supporting people in their wellness is actually listening and responding with compassion, empathy, or support. So when somebody responds that a project went really well this week, we're saying things like, that sounds like it must have been really meaningful. Or somebody says, I'm really sad about so-and-so leaving our workplace. We're saying things like, that has to be really hard for you, I understand. Or we're thanking people for sharing, or we're asking how we can help if we're in a position to be able to help. but responding is really important. We can't just hear that somebody is doing mediocre or fine or poorly, or even well, and then move on. We want to give space for feeling, for processing and reflection. And one of our tools that we use here is we have 45 Reloveutionary check-in questions, which I'm going to put in the chat for all of you who are here. And you can use this bit.ly for those of you who are tuning in into the recording. 45 questions that push the envelope a little bit. Sometimes people are like, I don't even know what to ask. Here are some things that you can ask to be able to truly support your team and to engage in those check-ins in a meaningful way. Our second practice is emotional honesty. Emotions are storytellers. Our unpleasant emotions like anger and loneliness and frustration and sadness and grief and loss and depression, all of those are storytellers. Our pleasant emotions are also storytellers. So being hopeful or happy or joyful or excited, all of those are also storytellers. And all of our emotions have a role and impact in how we and other people work. And this is really important because just because we're feeling an emotion that we don't like doesn't mean that we can just turn it off and make it go away. Some of us are better at regulating emotions than others, but our unpleasant emotions are completely inevitable. They're inevitable for us and they're inevitable for our team. And they tell us a story. They tell us that something's chasing us if we're feeling afraid. They tell us that something good happened if we're feeling happy. They're telling us that we're good at our jobs if we just got praise or appreciation. They're telling us all sorts of stories, and it's our job to be able to know what is the story that this emotion is telling us. Our unpleasant emotions, even though we don't generally like the way they feel, they are not the problem. Our response to them is the problem. So if we are screaming in someone's face because we are angry, or we are throwing things or slamming doors because we are angry, that response is a problem. If we completely shut down and don't talk to anybody because we are frustrated with how things are going, that response is the problem. That emotion is not the problem. And we need to do better as a society at cultivating this emotional honesty, not just emotional positivity in workplaces, because people are not going to be happy all of the time. And people with the highest well-being in workplaces are not always the happiest employees. And that's really important to remember. They're the most emotionally honest employees, the people who can lean into how they are feeling and respond appropriately and constructively. Something else here that's important is that humans have to be emotionally intelligent, but also workplaces themselves and organizations themselves need to be emotionally intelligent. And this includes systems and policies. So if our workplaces are not designed to absorb both pleasant and unpleasant emotions, if your leadership strategy is not to be able to have a high tolerance level for unpleasant and pleasant emotions, you're going to have a really limited ability to nurture all of the emotional conditions on your team. So I just want you to think about that for a second. Something else that we can think about here is that as leaders, as people who are showing up, we can consider activities in our practice to foster ideal emotions. So if you know that you want people to be excited when they come into a meeting, you might start with a gratitude practice or a fun icebreaker to get people laughing. If you feel like need people to come to a space that's serious and contemplative and they need to be able to actively reflect, maybe you're starting with a mindfulness exercise or a breathing exercise to calm the energy in the room. And so part of this cultivating wellness and cultivating emotional honesty is about creating the conditions for what we are looking for. And so we want to be doing that as much as humanly possible. Rachel, I think we're going to get to this point in a second. So tips for changing a culture of blaming. We need to make sure that blame is in the right place. And I think we're going to touch on that. And if we don't exactly, we will, I'll come back to it at the end. The third area of fostering and supporting people with their mental health and wellness is that we each need to model boundaries. So often we're telling other people to set boundaries, but we're not modeling them. I remember clear as day saying to a staff member once, do as I say, not as I do, and telling him to go home at 5 o'clock, even though I knew I was going to be sitting there until 10 p.m. So when we're thinking about this, we want to model boundaries. This means we have to have boundaries to begin with, and that we have boundaries for ourselves and also with our teammates. So something we do a lot of at Reloveution through our coaching practice is helping leaders think proactively about what boundaries they need to set with their teammates on their first day. How do you want to communicate? How do you prefer to communicate? What do you need when you're experiencing unpleasant emotions? How are we going to schedule meetings? What access do you have to each other outside of work hours? Those sorts of things we want to name early and often, right? And then as we name them, we have the ability to uphold them. We want to make sure that we are saying no when something compromises or violates our boundaries, and remember that no is a full sentence, and it's no is a full sentence for us, and it's a full sentence for others. We need to take real vacation time and unplug from work outside of work hours. We need to rest. We need to advocate for ourselves. We need to do and talk about things and people that you love outside of work. So if your people are showing up and all they hear is you talking about work, then that's what's being modeled for them as appropriate to talk about. So if you talk about your kid's Little League game or your kayaking trip last week or your fun vacation, that gives them permission to do those things. And that can be really powerful. And we also never want to compromise on our non-negotiables. So when we have boundaries and people know those boundaries, don't let people cross the boundaries, which is easier said than done. This is an awareness moment where practice makes better and not perfect. Another thing we can do to foster wellness and well-being on our team is to recognize that burnout is real and to help our people heal from and prevent burnout. So we need to recognize that burnout results from chronic stress and is not going to be healed after one day or even a week off. I get requests for a training all the time on healing from and preventing burnout. And they say, we've got 90 minutes or we've got 2 hours for this. And I can plant seeds in that time, but we're certainly not going to heal in that time. And so thinking about if people on your team are experiencing burnout, what can we do in the long term? How do we help people heal as individuals and work to actively disrupt the systems and practices that translate to burnout to begin with? This requires us to know the warning signs and symptoms for yourself and for your teammates, and it might look different. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I think sometimes people can't sleep when they're burnt out, or they can't concentrate when they're burnt out, or they're crying all the time when they're burnt out, or they just completely detach. And so we need to know for ourselves what our warning signs are and also what our teammates are, and intervene before it's too late. If we already are in the burnout space, it is much harder to intervene than when we're just a little bit stressed. We want to make sure that we're explicit about expectations and non-negotiables, even if it feels uncompassionate. So again, accountability is a huge part of this. We can't just set expectations and then when somebody comes to us with a really sad story, compromise on every deadline. Doesn't mean that there aren't times to be flexible. We need to be flexible. That's a part of being a compassionate boss. And we need to know what our non-negotiables are, because if we continue bending the rules, if we continue bending our expectations, we can't actually do our work. And so balancing the compassion and the accountability, the empathy and the high expectations is really, really important. Reloveution has a number of supports available in this particular area that we can follow up with you on. So we run a program called the Beat Burnout Program. It's generally 4 to 6 months long that incorporates a bunch of training, a diagnostic tool, and a combination of coaching and leadership training to be able to support your organization through their burnout. So, or through their people's burnout or their collective burnout. And so if you have questions about that, you can feel free to reach out to me. And again, I'll share my contact information at the end of the presentation. We also want to make sure that we are fostering belonging as much as possible. So this means that we are aware of and addressing interpersonal struggles and dynamics in real time. So often leaders come to me and they're talking about one of these dynamics, and it's like, well, how long has this been going on? And it's been going on for years, sometimes generations. And we need to intervene early when we see these things come up, because if any of these pieces, favoritism and nepotism, inside jokes, gossiping and rumors, cliques, bias and discrimination, lack of transparency, if any of these things are coming up for people, it is really, really hard to course correct when it's been embedded into the DNA. So we want to make sure that we're practicing transparency and sharing information openly. Whenever possible, make the implicit explicit. That is something that organizations generally don't do a lot of, and leaders keep information close, which sometimes is important, but people want to know what's happening, and that helps people feel safe. If they don't know what's happening, they're creating stories in their head about what's happening, and generally the stories are much worse than what's actually happening. So make the implicit explicit. Want to make sure that everybody is critically examining hierarchy and silos within the workplace. So if your marketing department and your finance department and your programs departments don't know how to communicate, don't know how to get things done, don't know how to collaborate, we want to make sure that we are addressing that. That we are thinking about how to build relationships across those departments. We also want to make sure that we're getting buy-in and commitment to company values and mission. When people feel like they are connected to those values, when they feel like they're connected to the mission, they feel like they belong, and that in itself cultivates wellness. So we want to be doing that as much as possible. Another way, very simple way we can foster belonging and wellness on our team is to provide specific praise on a regular basis. We also, or actually, before I move on, the ideal ratio for human beings is to get 6 pieces of praise to every piece of correction. And so, again, ambitious, practice makes better, not perfect, but we want the amount of praise that people get to be much, much larger than the amount of correction or constructive feedback that they are receiving. Really importantly to all of this, we need to make sure that we're taking reports of bias and discrimination seriously, and that we're doing everything in our power to course correct on those things. And if we don't, that is not a safe organization that is actively cultivating wellness. Bottom, like, period. We need to make sure that we're taking reports of that really, really seriously. And one of the ways that we can make sure that those reports happen is by creating ERGs, employee resource groups, or other safe spaces for people of or traditionally marginalized groups to come together and share and reflect in a safe and confidential way. So all of those pieces foster belonging. We lead a year-long program called the Belonging Builders program. And so this is the very, very Cliff Notes version, the 2-minute version to a year-long process. So again, if you have questions about this, feel free to reach out. Another way that we can cultivate wellness on our teams is by providing space for storytelling and truth sharing, which means that people are talking about and being given space to talk about where they come from, why they're here in this organization, how they got here in this organization, why they stay here in this organization, and what makes them them as a human being. We need to be getting to know each other for real. We want in our organizations to make telling the truth a praiseworthy rather than a punishable offense. And that is really, really important because people are afraid of telling the truth to their boss. When truth is hard, we don't often share it. And if we are having to hold our truth in, that's a form of violence against ourselves. And we want to create workplaces that where telling the truth is something that is valued, where people can show up authentically and say, this is really hard, or this happened to me, and I need you to know this. And a part of this is making sure that we're giving choices and ensuring that sharing is consensual. So just because you ask somebody to share their story doesn't mean that they have to share it with you. If they don't feel safe, they have the ability to say no. Just because somebody shares their story with you doesn't mean you're going to feel safe sharing it back. But we want to make sure that people are given choices in how to share and the depth at which to share, because for some people, it might not truly be safe to share. And we want to be able to respect that. That's a part of taking care of people's mental health. We also want to be cultivating organizations filled with curiosity and questions and empathy and listening. And so your wellness journey is not going to be the same as other people's wellness journey. We as leaders want to ask more questions than feels comfortable, with the intention to better understand people and their perspectives, not necessarily agree with them. We want to make sure that we are practicing empathy, even if we don't fully understand or agree. That means trying to walk in somebody's shoes, at least to some extent, and understanding where they're coming from. Again, even if they're not your shoes and it's not your journey that you're walking. When people are coming to us with their challenges, we want to provide affirmation and support. And we want to make sure that we are listening, really, really listening. And in our culture, we are not good listeners. So this is something that many people want to pay more attention to, including me. I'm not a great listener, and I'm working on it. All right, so I started this presentation by talking about how self-care is not the solution. It is a solution. One of the other solutions is community care. So shifting mindsets from a perspective of self-care to community care. Self-care is good, community care is even better. So this means that we're creating cultures where people look out for, take care of, and advocate for each other, with or without pressure, with or without leadership, and people feel it. People know that this is happening, that their colleagues have their backs. This means that we need to shift wellness resources to be embedded or aligned with our work, not just be add-ons, right? So if you are encouraging people to get that massage, you want that to be during work time that's paid, and you want it to be at a time where that's not scheduled at the same time that everyone is in meetings, right? We want, if you're going to have a retreat or a reflection section, same thing. We want that to be embedded into work and not as an extra thing that people want to do. That means that your community is caring for you rather than putting the onus on you to have to do it yourself. Something I really appreciate, I don't lead it, but there are mental health first aid trainings out there for lots of lots of organizations are taking advantage of. I encourage that everybody, not just leaders, get mental health first aid training so that you can identify signs of mental health issues or challenges. You can notice warning signs of burnout, and you know at least the first couple of steps to be able to address those in real time. And then we want to be creating work cultures that prioritize the 5 social determinants of health. So the 5 social determinants of health are education, healthcare access and quality, environment, social and community context, and economic stability. All 5 of these things can be built into your organizational wellness plans. This is something we work with organizations on. We want there to be space for education. We want to make sure that healthcare is widely accessible, that it's good healthcare. We want our culture and environment to match our values. We want to create social and community contexts that are safe and that encourage active well-being. And the money part is also important, although it is not the most important thing. We've got 2 more here. So sharing resources and benefits is really important, but it can't stop there. All of these other things need to happen as well. So this means that we are openly sharing information about resources and benefits related to well-being and mental health on a person's first day on the job, before they are burnt out, before they are tired, before they are exhausted, before they are in crisis. We do not want to wait for people to be down, unwell, or detached to be able to make resources known or available. We want to keep information about national or local community resources readily available in a public place where people know where to find that without having to ask for it, because asking for help can be a barrier to entry. And we want people to take advantage of those benefits without guilt or shame. People get vacation time because they deserve vacation time. They get PTO because they deserve PTO. We shouldn't make people feel guilty or shameful about taking those benefits or taking advantage of family leave if they need it. And one of the things that can really help with this is that for each of us, actually sharing our experiences of taking advantage of resources or benefits in real time. And then all of this is not possible without human connection and relationship building. So again, we want to be getting to know people, not just for what they do, but also for who they truly are. We want to prioritize those check-in times and not canceling or rescheduling those check-in times constantly. We want to give space for people across hierarchy and departments to truly get to know each other. And we need to take it offline. So get offline, off Slack, off Zoom, and meet in real life as a team at least quarterly is my preference, if possible. We want to be giving space for joy and fun and optimizing for serendipity and organic interactions as much as possible, because those are pieces that we have been greatly missing in our mostly virtual environments. So for those of you who are tuning in, this is not at all what my workshops look like. It feels very uncomfortable to just talk for about 35 minutes, just talk at people, talk at a room of boxes. I prefer things to be much more interactive than this. But I want you to think about what are the other strategies that you or your organization use. And if you're tuning in live, you can put those in the chat, and I'll share those out. But all of these things are the starting point, right? You all showed up here today because you want to be able to better support the mental health and well-being of your team. And hopefully you're going to be walking away with some concrete strategies for being able to activate that wellness, to build more healthy workplaces for everybody involved. So I'm going to share my my contact information here for those of you who are watching the recording, and then we are going to get into a brief question and answer session with the people who are tuning in live if there are additional questions. So if you want to be in touch about any of the services that we're talking about, or you're looking to dig deeper, these are ways we're here to help, and these are ways that you can contact me, and we would be so incredibly grateful to hear from you. Best of luck, and thank you again for caring so much about your team's mental health and wellness.